Hello, this is Aaron Wissner, and I am here at home. It is Monday, May the 19th. It's about 10:30 p.m. And rather than doing a video journal for the whole week, I'm going to do one for just today. And I made up a list of things I'm going to talk about. So I have like 7 topics. The first is calls scheduled for local future. I'm going to share how many. I've got like 6 calls scheduled with other people. Some interesting topics, I think. So if you are a subscriber to the local future channel, I think you'll like these. I had a 2-hour call with a person who I hadn't yet got to know today with Linda, one of my friends online. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, I think the title is Feminism, so I think relates around the topic of feminism. I also had a discussion about the future with one of my high school friends, Lori, on Facebook. And so I'll talk a little bit about what the future is going to be like for people. My sons and I, we did some, watched a couple documentaries this evening about existence and why we exist and determinism. And so I'll talk about that a little bit. What's the purpose in life anyway? And let's see. I wrote a little exponential story about exponential growth in a jar. So I'm going to read that. I'm also going to comment on a couple interesting YouTube videos I watched. I watched quite a few in the middle of the night this morning, like at 2 a.m., but I don't recall what those are. But there's one by Arthur Kelly, which I thought was really good today, about 4 possible futures, and one by, I think it's Chamath. I don't know how to say his last name, but and then finally just a little bit about the future of education, because Andrea, one of my Facebook friends, asked about that a little bit, like what's the future of education, and she wrote a journal. She asked me to reflect on it, so I haven't read her journal yet, but I will maybe just reflect on that a little bit anyway. Hey, first of all, thank you so much for viewing. Even if you're the only one person or 2 people, I mean, you can see how many people have viewed this. Most of those people, by the way, 90% of them only got this far and then they went somewhere else. So it's perfectly okay if you want to go somewhere else. You know, I'll never know. It's just like if you ever go to a conference and if the organizers are good organizers, they'll say, hey, you know, there's 10 different sessions going on at the same time. If you get into one and you're like, oh, you know, this isn't, I'm just not feeling it, you know, I'm not getting anything out of this, then, you know, use those voting feet and go somewhere else. If you like the Local Future Network, now the whole purpose, the whole reason I created the Local Future Network was because I wanted people to have an idea about what the future was going to be like, number one, to start thinking about what it was going to be like, and then give people some idea of how to prepare and what, you know, what it's going to be like, what the good parts are going to be, you know, what the changes are going to be, what the differences are going to be. My friend Henry Warwick was he very nicely pointed out at one time that the name Local Future is just a little bit too specific, and maybe it should be more local futures, since you know, every place is a little bit different and everybody's future is going to be different. It's not like a cookie cutter thing. Yeah, those are the things I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to go particularly speedily tonight in my talking because I'm feeling just a tad contemplative. So again, as I've mentioned in other videos, if you want to speed this up to like 2 times speed or 1.5 speed or 1.75 or something, you might find that better than watching me in regular 1-time speed. And again, if you have someplace else to go, that's perfectly okay. I don't mind. I mean, there's lots of great content on YouTube. I mean, I find more stuff every day, and on the internet, there's so much interesting stuff. And really reaching out to other people is really important. So if you have anybody you can reach out to through social media or email or whatever, you know, that's so important, because having a strong network, a social network, both over, you know, electronic means and also in person, real life, those are really critical, both for happiness, I think, and for security, and just having a good life. So yeah, and with that, one more chance, you guys can head for the exit. And if not, you know, well, you could always thumbs up, and you can always leave a comment. And if you want to, as I'm talking, go ahead and, you know, put little comments in there. I love comments. They're so fun to read. In fact, one of the videos, the Arthur Kelly video that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, that was really just someone who had watched my video log from yesterday, and they put that in as a comment. Or maybe they watched the chat that Nicole Foss and I had yesterday. But that was really good. So yeah, if you got something to share with me, I really appreciate it. I like stuff like that. That's good. I'm trying to learn, you know. My favorite thing is to learn and then to share stuff. I started off as loving teaching in 4th grade, I think, when Mr. Merriman, my math teacher at the time, noticed that I was good at fractions, and he said, "Oh, Aaron, why don't you, you know, you've got all your worksheets done and everything. Why don't you see if you can help out, you know, a few of your classmates here on fractions?" And I really liked that. And I always thought that, you know, helping other people learn stuff would be something I would do. So if this was 4th grade, this would have been about 1980, so about 40 years ago now. And I've always enjoyed, you know, helping people learn stuff. Okay, here we go. So calls scheduled. And I'll have to bring up the right thing. I've got a screen share. And let me pop this up first and then screen share. So these are the calls I have scheduled so far for this week. Obviously, I'm on this call right now. Oh, I think I did something wrong. Let me try it again. Oop, I moved it, so I think it didn't like that. Oh my gosh, I got a response from Vandana. Vandana. Oh, Vandana might do a call. Vandana Shiva. She says, we can look at a date for the second half of June. Isn't that exciting? She's like a hero of mine. I mean, she's doing all this work in India and around the world on making sure that, you know, the poorest people, and I mean, I want to say us, but I'm not in that boat at the moment. So that the poorest people have what they need. I mean, she really reminds me of a new Gandhi. So yeah, that's exciting. I'd emailed her a couple times, and well, I emailed her once and she hadn't responded, so I followed up. One of my as a teacher, I taught in public schools for over 25 years, and one of the principals I had, Holly, she mentioned a number of things to me, but one of the things she mentioned to me was that well, maybe she didn't mention this to me, but sending her something one time, that was not enough to get her to think about it. I mean, you had to follow up once, maybe a day or two later, and then again a day or two later, because she just had so much stuff, you know. And I've noticed that with people that I ask if they want to do a call for an interview, that they'll say, you know, the first time they might not respond, and then a week later I'll follow up. I like how Gmail, the AI in Gmail will like pop those ones back up to the top and say, hey, do you want to do a follow-up? So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, here's the list of calls. So yeah, right now we're doing this one, Feminism, Collapse, Purpose, in the Future. Tomorrow morning, or well, actually at noon tomorrow, Serena and I, Serena Farb, we're going to talk about Max. Oh, what's Max's book's name? It's oh, I've got it up. Here it is. Just a second. It's called Life 3.0. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? Max Tegmark, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. So I haven't read this whole book, but what I found interesting was the book, the chapter 5 of the book, because it talks about 12 different futures for humanity. And which future do we choose? And depending on how you talk to, like if you talk to Nicole Foss, you know, she might say, you know, some of these are just impossible. And there's maybe only one or two that are really possibilities. But so I asked Serena if she would read that chapter, and hopefully I think it'll be an interesting talk, because Serena's young, you know, she's in her later 20s, and she's like gung-ho, you know, she wants to save the world, and she's trying to figure out how to do it. And she's like a lot of us, trying to figure out, you know, what to do to save the world and make things better, you know. Daniel Quinn, I think, had an interesting quote in one of his books. He said, you know, saving the world, of course, what it means is saving it for humans, but saving it for humans also means saving it for everybody else, all the rest of the animals and plants and everything, you know, all of life, the whole of life on Earth. Max is actually kind of interesting because he has written about that stuff as well. I don't think you can see me right now, so I'm going to flip back, and yeah, I like to be able to see people when I'm talking anyway. So Serena and I are going to talk about that. I'm going to try to broadcast all these live. So if you're online for any of these, you know, join us on YouTube, and then you can put comments in and stuff, and I'll try to respond and stuff. In fact, I don't even know where's my live right now. I don't even know where my live one is right now. There it is. Yeah, so nobody's watching right now. It's just me. That's okay. It's late. It's quiet. It's like quiet. I don't know why I have this other video playing. Okay, let's see. Well, I was going to talk about that. Deanna and I, we know each other from 1987, and she is now a sexologist who lives in New York City. And so we're going to do this call. I'm not sure how it's going to go, but she wrote a book called Unpacking Your Sexual Baggage for Your Spiritual Journey. So that should be interesting, you know, because I certainly don't, you know, feel particularly comfortable talking on YouTube about sex all that much. I have seen certain, I mean, I kind of know what the limit is as far as, you know, I'm an adult. I've watched discussions of sexuality on YouTube before, but that, I think that'll be interesting to chat with her, because, you know, I'll just remind her that it's for YouTube, and we might have to label it adult only. So, and then Robert Rapier, I talked to him about a month ago about when the oil price went down to negative. And so it's the same time of the month again, the 20th, basically, of the month. It's not always exactly the 20th, but that's when the oil futures in the United States end, like the contracts end, and you have to settle up. You have to do something with the oil, or you have to get rid of the futures contract. And that's the same contract that I ended up losing basically 2 years of salary on when I made the wrong bet. I bet it was going to go up, and it went down. And so, yeah, that was a big learning opportunity for me, 2005 or 2006, whenever that was. And then Ellen Brown, who I haven't talked to in a decade, she is really, really good about, you know, how do we make sure everybody has a job, right? So obviously that's a concern, that everybody has a job, everybody feels like they're doing something useful. And I'll get to that a little bit later as well. But she and I are going to talk about that. There is, I mean, we'd have to go into a lot of detail to talk about money and how money works, but there's a way to do it where states in the United States, the 50 states that there are, all of them, except for one of them has its very own bank. And so it can create as much money as it needs to pay whoever it needs to do whatever. So that's a lot of power, right? That's like the same power that a nation has, a sovereign nation. And there's nothing that prevents the other states from doing that. Now, there are issues with this, sure. I mean, the spending has to be reasonable. And if you follow online, there's Peter Schiff. He's one of the people that predicted the previous crash of the the economy, the Great Recession, as it was called, 2007, 8, 9. And he would say that's just much money creation probably, but we're going to talk about that. And there's already a number of her talks online. So that when she came to the conferences I set up, the local future conferences back in 2010-ish time. And then on Thursday, David Korowitz, and he had a topic that he kind of wanted to talk about. And so I put down hypercomplexity versus anti-fragility. I think that's kind of what he wanted to talk about, but I emailed him. I haven't heard back yet. He's sleeping right now because he's 5 hours ahead in Ireland, I think. So it would be, what, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so it's like 3:40 in the morning for him. So he's not awake. And then next Monday at 6 p.m. EDT, Nicole Foss and I'll be on the call again. And so I haven't had a chance to retouch base with Nicole, but I really like chatting with her, just because I think we can, I mean, even if we're not perfect, and even if she doesn't predict the future perfectly, and then, I don't have a perfect, at least it's a different sort of perspective, right? I mean, rather than, and I have a positive perspective on the future. I mean, we're all going to get through this. I mean, those of us that stick together are going to get through this, obviously. The ones that don't stick together, we're going to have to bring them on board. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but we'll make it through this. Those that are, in places where it's really overshot, like where there's no way to grow enough food to feed the people, those are the folks I'm most concerned about, because I mean, what do you have if you don't have food? You don't have anything at all. What is money worth if you don't have food available? So, and then 3 more. Richard, he's going to be on a call with me in a couple weeks. He's busy today. He's busy right now. He was on a call last week or 2 weeks ago, and we talked about the Planet of the Humans film that came out on Earth Day. If you haven't seen that one yet, it's interesting. I would take it as partially commentary, though, not like 100% documentary, but I imagine if you're watching this, you're pretty good at picking out bias and what is really, really accurate and not. And then Joseph Tainter, yeah, he's really interesting. He wrote that book called The Collapse of Complex Societies, which is kind of what David's talking about too, right? So Joseph, again, I had to email him a couple times, but he was like, yeah, well, I guess maybe this week or next week. So I'm hoping to get him on. And then Ray Sikora, she's awesome. I mean, she's just so peaceful and stuff. She's like a modern day May Sarton, or I don't know my what would you call it, the folks who are really kind of spiritual, not spiritual, but just real, down to earth people. So I don't know the best way to describe. So that's it for that one. Next, my call with Linda. Okay, now let me just want to make sure that we have, yeah, nobody's watching, so that's fine. One of my Facebook friends, her name is Linda, and she often will, I don't even remember how we became Facebook friends. I don't know that I've ever met her face to face. Maybe she came to one of the local future conferences or events. I don't know. But so she often will, and I got to take the screen share off. She will often on Facebook, you know how on Facebook and on other blog platforms or social media, you'll post stuff and a lot of times you post stuff and people don't like reply to it, and like nobody replies to it. And in my case, like I have 600 Facebook friends, and a lot of times nobody replies to stuff I post, and I try not to post all that much. I think that actually the best number is somewhere around once per week. I mean, if you want like a lot of engagement, and it needs to be like a photo you've taken yourself with a little paragraph about the photograph, and then and then depending on what the keywords are, it'll pop to the top. I mean, especially if it's about like a birth or a death or a wedding, or and depending on what the picture shows, and that it doesn't look too it looks humble and everything. Well, you know, I I post a lot of stuff, not as much as some of my friends. One of my friends, whose name I won't mention, I mean, he just reposts continuously, like, I don't know, like 50 items a day. So you go to his page and you're like scrolling, and you know, there might be a like here and a like there, but it's not a whole lot. Anyway, so Linda, I had my call with Linda, and she had lots of interesting comments on some of the stuff I posted, and a lot of it was about you know, the perspective of us versus them, and how that really so I'm just going to kind of reflect, I guess, on our call, so rather than summarizing it. So I think that we were on the call for about 2 hours. And Linda was originally from Michigan. She's living in New Mexico now. And she lives in a tiny house, you know, like literally a tiny house, like a 200 or 300 square foot house. So it's small, and it has a little loft where she has her bed and everything. And she was born in the 40s, late 40s. And she went to university and went to work on her grad school and everything. And she had a very interesting, but I should reflect, I should do my reflection. So here's my reflection. I'm going to pop up my notes. Well, you know, when I think of civilization, I often think of like Daniel Quinn, and I'll also think of, you know, how did people live before civilization, or when civilization had collapsed in between, like this phase and the next phase, you know, like when there was the Black Death plague, and what happened before and after. And there's, in Daniel Quinn's work, he talks about a lot about the takers and the leavers. And the takers are the ones that believe in land being property, and that you can own land and you can fence it, and then it's yours. And a person has a right to do whatever they want to the land. They can take off every little living thing. They can put on whatever they want. They can move the land. They can, I mean, literally keep anyone off. I mean, that goes to an extreme in Michigan, for example. So if someone comes on your land in Michigan, where I live, there's this stand your ground law, which is if you feel threatened, or you feel like your family's being threatened, you can basically go after them with using deadly force if they're on your land. So, I mean, it's really at an extreme right now in the world. I mean, it's so extreme that people are like, this is mine. I mean, it reminds me of when my sons were, you know, tiny, like 2 or 3 years old. And that's, I mean, there's still a little bit, I mean, they still have that a little bit, but my 12-year-old now, he's getting a little bit better with that, as far as, you know, yeah, it's mine, but sharing's okay. And 10-year-old's not at the same point yet, but at some point, you know, it's difficult because in civilization, you know, everybody's taught that ownership is everything. You own stuff, you own a room, you own land, you own a car, you own these things. You can do whatever you want with them. And that's one thing that we had to teach the boys really early, is no, I mean, just because it's yours, that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want with it. You can't break it. So I give you a toy and you break it? No. You know, or grandma or grandpa gives you a toy or whatever. No, it's not yours in that way. It's yours to take care of. You know, it's yours to protect and to cherish. And I mean, it reminds me of the Toy Story films, right? So Sorry for the pause. I told you you can turn it on 2x speed if if you're watching this. So Linda was really talking about how that is one of the things she didn't like about Daniel Quinn's writings. And so I thought that was really interesting because, you know, she was talking about how really it has to go back to love and sharing love and extending love to everybody, everybody, everybody. And she said, because we talked a little bit about religion, and she said, you know, the Holy Spirit in Christianity, the whole idea of the Holy Spirit is that the Holy Spirit is a synonym for love, which I think is so interesting because I wrote this piece back around Easter where the Pope had been giving a mass, and maybe it was before Easter, but he was reflecting on how these are difficult times. And of course, he's in the Vatican in Italy. And I said, since, you know, I kind of have, my values are very, very aligned with Christians in general, but they are, you know, I don't, you know, I believe understanding the universe is something a person does on their own, and that a person to be skeptical and critical and a good critical thinker, I mean, if there is a creator or a God, then that would be what the creator or God would maybe not want, but would be interested in. I mean, hey, here's this person. And I mean, imagine just for a moment that we are, you know, actually in the Matrix, right? Or something similar, a brain in a vat, or whatever you want to call it. We're a computer simulation, even, like some people say. I mean, we have all this ability, this faculty, this mental faculty, and are we just gonna, oh, you know, it's a book and that's it? We're just gonna study that book and we're not gonna look anywhere else? Or do you look everywhere in the universe and use all your senses, and you're like, wow, this is interesting stuff? So, for example, and a few people are going to be like, oh, Aaron, you don't, that's not right. And maybe I think I've said this before, but you probably haven't watched any of the other ones anyway, so you might not have seen that. But the whole idea of hybrid lunar solar eclipse, hybrid solar eclipse. So you've got the sun, you've got the moon, and the moon passes in front of the sun, but it's perfect. It's so perfect that the shadow that comes down to the earth, the shadow hits the earth on like just one spot. I mean, theoretically, it could be just the shadow could pass across a person's eyeball, like boop. And so they're looking up and they like see, they see the silver, the beads on the one side, and the moon passes in front, and then suddenly they see the beads, and they have like this little shadow just goes right across them. And what are the odds of that? That a person could go out in the world right now at this point in history, which is like such a small sliver of history, and that they could see that. And if there were a creator, I mean, isn't that like what you would want to do, to be like, hey, look at this? You think, I mean, do the odds. It's not really very likely, is it? In fact, it's almost impossibly unlikely. I mean, and I think I mentioned in the other video that the other way of thinking of it is, well, maybe life, in order for life to get jump started on this planet, if it started here rather than drifted from some other planet, you know, 4 billion years ago and drifted across space for 1,000,000 years and landed here. I mean, that's not my idea. I've read that other places. You know, maybe the moon eclipsing the Earth was something that was necessary for life to begin. That seems unlikely, because when life began, the moon was a lot closer, so the eclipse was a lot larger, and there wasn't something called a hybrid eclipse. A hybrid eclipse, if you're unfamiliar with the term, so if you're directly if you're on the Earth that's directly below the shadow, you get a total eclipse for maybe a minute or two. And then, but if you're further around the Earth and the shadow like comes around, but you're like in morning or evening, so further around, then you actually get an annular eclipse. So the moon comes in front of the sun, but it doesn't fully cover it. There ends up being a ring or an annulus around. That's a funny word, isn't that? Anyway, so I find all this interesting. I don't think there's any reason not to be curious about religion. I mean, I really don't. Some people aren't curious about stuff, but I'm curious about basically everything. I want to know how everything works and how it all fits together. And I love people who are willing to explore that stuff. I mean, that's fun. So Linda and I, again, we talked for a couple hours, and she was mentioning how, the Holy Spirit just means love. Well, that God is love and Jesus is love. That's an idea. I mean, literally, that this is the whole idea, that they are love, and Jesus in particular is love and is emulating love and altruism and compassion. And really, Christianity is about that feeling coming out. Linda had a little bit of a different perspective because she looks at it as far as it's all men, right? So it's a patriarchy. And of course, I'm a man too, not just a man, but a white man, not just a white man, but a white man who has a whole lot of comfort right now. I mean, I have tons of freedom compared to 95% of people. I have probably, half of my day free to do whatever I want every day. I never want for food or anything. So I'm just one that's in this situation, I guess. And most, obviously most people on the planet, most of the 7 billion, say 5 billion of them, 6 billion of them don't have it nearly as easy. So easy, so to speak. Of course, if I had to live, if I had to live as alone in the wilderness or something, I don't know what to eat. I'd die in a week or two. I'd try to eat something. I'd be like, oh, guess I shouldn't have eaten that. Yeah, so it's not like I know anything that's useful for survival. But so this whole idea of us versus them, I find myself falling into that, even rich versus poor. I mean, I know it's not really rich versus poor. I know that. And it's easy to fall into the, there are a lot of people who are already saying it's rich people versus the poor people. But, and while that's true from a certain perspective, it's not necessarily helpful to think of it that way. And this goes back to a piece that I wrote the other day about Jesus and what Jesus had to say about being kind to others. And I don't know, I could read that one to you too, but and maybe I will, just so I have it like all taken care of. But that wasn't on the list, so I might want to save that one for later. But Linda also used a couple interesting terms: enculturated, or maybe it was enculturated. So that means the culture has taught you and it's kind of captured you within the culture. Individualated. Now that was an interesting one. Individualated. So, humans obviously did not evolve as individuals living alone, like lone wolves or something. They lived like all the other great apes that have lots of food available. So they lived in large groups, family groups, communities, or bands, or whatever you want to call them. And they evolved that way. Humans evolved that way ever since they diverged from the other great apes. So I think, what was it with chimpanzees, are nearest cousin, and that's 4 million years ago, 5 million years ago. So all that time, all the way up until, the advent of agriculture, when humans went from becoming, animals that would go around and search for food and find food like all the other animals. And hey, look, that tree's got fruit. Let's go get that fruit. Or later on, hey, look, there's those seeds, the grass seeds. They're going to be ready. Let's go get those. Yeah, those look really good. That's going to be a lot of fun. Let's go. Let's bring the kids and everything. Show them what to look for. Part of this was before language. It's sign language, and then later it became verbal language. And so individuated. So now people see themselves as individuals, and they see themselves as belonging to themselves and not belonging to their family and their community. And I mean, this kind of touches on the whole idea of, what is freedom and what is your own individualness. And so I love that term. We talked about a lot of different ideas: loving yourself, loving others. It goes back to this chat I had with a fellow on the chatter page. So on Facebook, if you have ever looked, if you type in your hometown and then you type chatter, there's often a group. And if there isn't one, you can make one. And it's just for people who just want to have something to say. Usually it's, fairly small groups, say, 1,000 to 10,000. And so it could just be, hey, where do you guys buy, such and such for the house? Or, hey, is such and such a store open now? Or whatever. Anyway, a couple of these guys on the chatter, they were talking about, well, the governor, she doesn't know what she's doing. I mean, it could be any leader. They don't know what they're doing. Oh, they should get out of there. They're too strict. They're not strict enough. They're following the rules. They're not following the rules. They're consistent. They're not consistent. Whatever. And so the whole idea that you just have to love other people, and the challenge is to just love and reach out and help other people. That's the challenge right there. And so this fellow brought up the idea of Satan, right? Okay. So Satan, from my perspective, the idea is this is something that's inside of you that you're challenged by, right? You're challenged by these 7 deadly sins, so to speak, that there are these challenges like being greedy, taking more than you need. In Christianity, there's the Lord's Prayer, which is apparently people said, Lord, teach us to pray. How do you pray? And this was to Jesus, and this is written in a couple of the books in the Christian Bible. And he says, how does it go? I mean, I was thinking of this earlier today. Everybody knows this, right? So, our Lord, who art in the heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Okay, so just food for one day. And forgive us our debts. We owe debts to others. Please help us forgive us those debts. And forgive our debtors. So, those that owe to us, forgive them. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And it goes on from there. But I've, number one, forgotten it. And number two, not irrelevant. So the whole idea that, loving and not looking for blaming or Satan on the outside, that's not the idea. The idea is Satan is right here. It's those drives, those ethical drives, not the ethical, the survival drives we have, the drive away from suffering, the drive away from pain and hunger. I mean, all those drives that drive us away from being altruistic and reaching out to our family and friends and neighbors and everybody, to everybody, not just humans, but in the whole community of life. And if you go back to the story of Adam and Eve, for example, the whole idea is that there's this separation, right? So there's the separation between humans and nature. And then, oh, wow, humans noticed they were naked. But before that, right? I mean, this was paradise. Didn't have to wear clothes. You know, when we talk about our sexology talk a couple days from now, maybe we'll touch on that, because Deanna is also, she grew up in a Christian family, a strict Christian family, very, very strict. And so, yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot my thread for a second there, but it's a video log. Hey, it's a video log. Put it on 2x speed. Just love. So it's about love anyway. And reaching out and being altruistic and being community minded. So I thought that was interesting. And I had a thought, I wrote down this little thought, my 150. The thought is that each of us could have our own 150 people that we stay in contact with on a very regular basis. Obviously, some of them are going to be more frequent. Some of them are going to be less frequent. But I'm talking like one-on-one connection, face-to-face, whether it's face-to-face in person or face-to-face using video conferencing, or if it's face-to-face, so to speak, live, live voice. And that's good too, I think it's better to see people, but and 150 is a pretty big number. So there's this whole concept that a community, once it gets around 100, 150, that's about as big a community as you can make sure to know everybody well enough that you trust everybody 100%. And after that, it becomes very difficult to know everybody well enough. You add that 151st person, and then it becomes ever more difficult to know everybody well enough. And so, how many people do you or I really connect to? 150 is that's really high for most people. Most people don't have anywhere near that. In fact, close personal friends right now, like in the year 2020 in the United States, for example, the number of close personal friends, like they'll come over if you're throwing up, or if you're, like really close friends, that's like less than 5 for most people, aside from family, or maybe even counting family members. So to make connections, close connections, honest, real connections with other living human beings, trusting connections to the point where you're willing to rely upon them and they're willing to rely upon you for stuff. You don't get there instantly, but just building those connections. This goes back to the future, of course, because in the future, things are going to be changing a lot. Things are going to be really challenging, and we can talk about that. That's on my list as well. I might come back a little bit to Linda's part, but I think I'm going to move on. So yeah, my discussion with Lori was a little bit different, and Lori and I went to high school together. She was 2 years younger than me, so actually we were in school at the same time ever since she started kindergarten. I was probably in 1st or 2nd grade. I think she's 2 years behind me. And so one of my classmates, his younger brother, commented, hey, the comment was, one of my teachers said, do you know personally anybody who has had the virus or got the COVID-19 and then died? And if so, feel free to express your opinion regarding opening things up. opening things up. So again, this is May the 19th, 2020. And I reposted it thinking that all the people that had commented on her thread would come over to my thread, but none of the comments came over. And there were a lot of really interesting comments. But people started commenting, and my classmate's younger brother says, 4 family members have had it and they still believe it should open up. No punctuation, just still believe they should still open up. And so my response is, that's not surprising. I'm going to move this over here so my eye line is better with you guys. With you, the viewer. Thank you for watching. That's not surprising. Technical difficulties. That's not surprising. The question I'm always curious about when I hear something like this is, what exactly are they hoping to do once things are opened up? I mean, at the moment, I go wherever I want to go. So I'm not sure how opening up would change what I do in any way. And then Lori responded, most people I hear from say it's not that they don't want to go do things. Everything has been canceled, after all. It's that they want to go back to work and see their friends' businesses survive. People who don't feel safe always have a choice to stay home. And she edited that a little bit, it says. And so my response was, well, first of all was, oh my gosh, again, I accidentally hit Control V or something, and I deleted my entire response, which I thought was a good response. It was like a 5-paragraph response. So I said, oh, I deleted my 5-paragraph response. Drat. Hi, Lori. So nice to hear from you. I was just thinking about you and your husband, Brian, and a conversation that he and I were having on another topic, which if you know Lori and Brian, or if you are Brian or Lori, then you might know what I'm talking about. Anyway, okay, here's my reflection again for the second time. First, as far as I can tell, no one in Manistee or Benzie County will be arrested or resisted by police if they open their businesses. Probably not. I mean, the sheriffs already said they weren't going to do that in that part of Michigan. And I think plenty of friends will stand behind them. So that's one thing. So if people want to open their business, go ahead, open your business. Go into your shop, open the door, put the open sign on. There you go. Open your business. I mean, that's different than, if you have to have employees, but not a lot of people going out right now, so you probably don't need many employees. If it's a store or something like that, probably don't need a lot of employees. So go ahead. Second, as far as supporting friends, that's pretty simple. What do friends need? Friends need a friend. They need to know they're supported and they have people to rely upon. They need food, water, community, shelter, clothing. Most people have plenty of clothing where I live. Shelter, most people have plenty of shelter. Not everybody, obviously, but community is all around. You just go out the door and you can see other people's houses. So there is community available. Water in Michigan is abundant. Yeah, so it's so much water. It's just amazing. It's everywhere. It's been raining for the past 2 days. We got ponds and lakes and streams and Great Lakes, and it's all fresh water. It's not, you're not going to just go and drink it, but it's everywhere. It's water wonderland. Have a cookout. Of course, you can wear masks and do physical distancing, sure. So that's the second point. And then next, and this is where, people are not going to perhaps be happy. I said, most businesses are going to fail within a year or two due to the collapse of the economic bubble. Now, and people don't want to hear that. And to have like a happy face on that is like, oh, what are you talking about? What do you mean it's going to collapse? So, I tried to, put things in a little historical perspective. Most businesses are going to fail within a year or two due to the collapse of the economic bubble and the government's response to that. The response is, not helpful. They're spending money on stuff that has no future and spending money just crazy in the United States. So most people that gave one check that would cover not even rent for 1 month for most people that got the check, right? And a lot of people have been off work since the middle of March. It's 2 months now. So 2 months without any money for a lot of people. Some people were able to get money from the government called unemployment money, but not everybody. And the people who, aren't legally working or legal citizens or whatever, I mean, there's just such a huge, there's hundreds of people, millions of people falling through the cracks, getting nothing at all. So one of my neighbors, I mean, all she does is just make meals for the people that have no money, they have no food, and that's all she does. She makes hundreds of meals a week for them with her organization. We're entering the next Great Depression. Not my idea. I mean, this is an idea a lot of people have had for a long time, so it's not a big surprise if you're paying attention. We're entering the next Great Depression, as some commentators are calling it now. The Greater Depression we may be entering, so bigger than the previous Great Depression, and we don't have any memory. I pointed out that nobody that I know can really tell a story of the time before the previous Great Depression and what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened. I mean, even my grandparents, they were just kids during the previous Depression, and they've died already. So yeah, there's so few people left, and that could be a big factor of having a huge depression, is that nobody remembers, nobody's talking about the previous one. We're entering the Greater Depression, as some commentators are calling it now. So most businesses will close. That's what Nicole Foss and I were talking about yesterday. If you haven't watched that video, that one, it's a lot more peppy. You might like that. In Berry County, where I live, they are closing on what seems to be almost a daily basis, things like hair salons, restaurants, mom and pop shops, etc. No one in our generation or our kids' generation or our parents' generation or even our grandparents' have seen the huge boom prior to a real economic depression. I wish our history teacher in high school, Mr. Matesic, had spent more time on that topic and how it has influenced world events since the end of the Jubilee era. And the end of the Jubilee era, of course, Jubilee is when all the debts are forgiven. It's usually when a new emperor or king comes into power, or when there's a war to overtake, and they say, hey, when we win the war, we're going to get rid of all your debts. Or, hey, if you fight in the war, when we're done with the war, we're going to forgive your debts if you fight for us. So either way, the debts are forgiven. But the Jubilees basically ended 2,000 years ago. So this was around the time of Jesus again. I'm interested in the timing of that. I'd like to, Michael Hudson would probably know more about that. He's very, very good on his history and economics both. Most businesses will fail, and that is, of course, what it means to live in a country based on capitalism and ownership, rather than on cooperation and cooperatives and families. The owner or entrepreneur gets the good stuff. When the bubble is inflating, the economic gets wiped out. When collapses. All the risk is in the hands of the little guys, the mom and pops, and the employees, of course. And I wanted to say, Nicole and I discussed this great depth, and if you want to know what is going on, watch this one. And so I refer to the previous talk around the 18-minute mark. And then I go on to talk about I mean, you and I know this stuff already, right? We've seen and heard what Bear Lake Village has been through for the past 150 years. So a few of my great-great-great-grand family are the ones who settled and or conquered that part of Michigan in the 1860s. And I imagine Lori had some relatives at the same time. Didn't one of your great-great-grandparents originally homestead in the area? There were recessions in 1861, 67, 70, the Panic of 1873 and 85 and 01, the Panic of 93 and 96, the recession of 1900. Boy, my numbers are all messed up here. 1907, 1911, recession of 1914, and I put the whole list of recessions in the United States. And I said, anyway, how many businesses are still around from the founding of Bear Lake in 1863? None. They all got wiped out at one point or another. Sure, there's a place to buy food, but Chuck's Hanson's Grocery, that's gone. The original IGA is gone. Almost all the gas stations are gone. The movie theater's gone. The arcade's gone. The variety store's gone. Wow, there isn't much at all that is still around. I mean, there's not really much left in the village anyway. It was a village of maybe 300, 400 people at one time, but you know, that was 100 years ago. It was really a vital place. And once the trees were all cut, I mean, yeah, that was the story of just trees being cut down. Just like in the Amazon, all cut down. So what is going to be left after this? I guess only what people really, really have to have: food, fuel, electricity, and stuff. And I said, hey, sorry, that's probably way too much detail. I guarantee it will all happen at once. The Great Depression in the 20s took about 4 or 5 years to reach bottom, and there were plenty of time when things were looking up. And Lori responds, yeah, you definitely have more time on your hands than I do, laughing out loud. A couple of quick answers though. The police here aren't arresting anyone, but hefty fines have been given. People are afraid of losing their licenses. Telling business owners that their business will fail anyway, eventually, isn't going to cut it. They have a right to fight for it. If they fail, so be it. But hopefully for a reason other than the governor, so again, this is blaming, said they can't be open based on projections, inflated death rates, and regional hotspots. The Detroit area is definitely a different story and needed a strict lockdowns. We did what was asked and flattened the heck out of the curve weeks ago. So I didn't respond to that whole thing, but I said, well, planning for an uncertain future is both urgent and important. So I'm making time for this sort of thing, especially for real people like you and your husband. Interestingly, if there is fines, I would just not pay them. Ignore them like a parking ticket. They'll go away eventually, and no one will support enforcing them anyway, because there'll be so many of them and people will be just like, fighting the rising tide. It doesn't make sense. I'm sorry to say, did you see the article that one of my other friends, Jamie, posted yesterday about the Lake Michigan high water level? Same thing in this case. People can put up seawalls and put rocks out and cross their fingers and ask for luck, but fighting in that way is pointless. They're not in control. as I imagine you are Christian in the common sense of the word, you would think this is will, for example. The reason that I pointed you to that particular spot in Nicole Foss's chat is because we talk about how businesses can fight changing rules, maybe I should have said roles, by doing something different, finding new opportunities. For example, growing food locally, storing food locally, providing energy locally. These sorts of things and many more will make sense. But a business owner that fights the rising lake waters is just throwing away their time, their energy, their money, and perhaps their lives. And I said, did you see Chamath's discussion of this the other day? And I said, well, I'll try to find it. I didn't end up finding it, but it might have been somebody else who was talking about that. And I said, one example was a pizza restaurant, I think it was in Chicago. They had a great pizza oven, but that wasn't able to see enough pizzas. But they realized that they could cook plastic in the oven for face shields for personal protective equipment. That's the sort of thinking, not I have a musical instrument store, but rather I have a business that serves this community with what they need, want, and can afford. And now, I guess, they need locally grown food and local food storage. And that's what I'm going to be now. I'm going to be in the business of helping people. And that's how I'm going to keep my business going. You know, that's flexibility. Lori didn't respond to the whole thing. She said, I agree with not paying the fines, but a lot of people are too scared to take that stand. And so I said, if we all stand behind them, then the government will have no choice but to dismiss these fines. Same thing with rents and mortgages. As long as we stand behind those that refuse or can't pay, then they won't be evicted or homeless. So and as my son used to say, oh, Dad, I'm going to check my email. I'm going to check my email. Yeah, nothing new. Okay, where were we at on our list? Neil deGrasse Tyson. Oh, yes. So I know why nobody's viewing right now, too. So when I'm on Zoom and I'm posting, the thing is that the local future channel has like 4,000 subscribers right now, but I also have my own like personal YouTube. I don't know if there's any subscribers. I have 40, so instead of 4,000, 40. And when you're in Zoom, you have to tell it which account you want it to publish to. So I'm going to have to upload this separately to get it on the local future channel. The good news is everybody can watch it at 2x speed. All right. Number 4, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Cosmos Possible Worlds and Stephen Hawking Genius. I might not be able to do all these stories tonight, but because I'm getting tired. But so this one, I'm going to show a couple slides and get them ready first. Doot, 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 doot. Okay, Cosmos Possible Worlds. Doop, doop, doop. So Cosmos Possible Worlds, amazing series. And this series is all about the universe and why we're here and what the universe is like, and big things and small things and the quantum realm, quantum theory. And so we're watching these episodes, and the one we watched tonight is called Magic Without Lies, and it's all about these whole ideas of what's called quantum entanglement and the double slit experiment, where if you shoot electrons at a sheet of paper, or a sheet of metal or whatever it is, and there's two slits. Well, then the electrons can go through either slit, and the same with light. The light can go through either slit. And so what you would expect behind, like on the wall, you'd expect to see two slits of light. But you don't necessarily see that. What you'll see is like this interference pattern. And for electrons, if you send the electrons through one at a time, you'll see like these two lines. But if you send it through a bunch, or if you're not looking even, that, anyway, it's very interesting. So this series, if you haven't seen this series, you should take a look at it. And then Genius by Stephen Hawking, that's really, really amazing. So this episode number 3, Why Are We Here? Just outstanding, because he's talking about the difference between determinism and strict determinism and loose or weak determinism. And it's just, oh, so interesting. So my sons and I, we chatted about this, my older son, my 12-year-old, and I chatted about this for a long time about, you know, do we have free choice? And what's the universe like anyway? And we've been talking a lot about how the universe is mathematical. I mean, strictly mathematical. Everything is math. Literally math. Geometry. It's everything you see, every quark, every electron, every photon, it's all math. Like, really, it's math. That's what it is. So for the math genius who has learned everything there is to learn about math and physics, and how physics is really math, and how chemistry is really physics is really math, and how biology is really chemistry is really physics is really math, and that they'd be able to understand reality, right? And so one idea is that, oh, and this is my novel thought, okay, because a lot of my thoughts are not novel, obviously. I haven't heard anybody have this thought before, though. So what do people say? Attend to this, listen to this. Okay, so here's the novel thought. So there is what's called a many worlds theory. And the many worlds theory, I'm just going to look it up to make sure I'm saying exactly the right one. Many worlds interpretation. So the many worlds interpretation is that every time something based on random events occurs, that the universe actually splits into another universe where the other possibility happened. So for example, if I flip a coin and it lands heads, and I do one particular thing, and if it flips tails and I don't do that thing, then those two, if I actually flip that coin and make my decision based on that, then those two realities actually do exist, because it could have come up either way. And it's not exactly like that, because it's got to start at the quantum level. So in Stephen Hawking's video, he has this sponge shooter, and the sponge will get shot at one of 3 people. And it's based on this rotating wheel. And when the wheel stops, whoever's color it's on, it'll shoot it at that person. But when it stops, it's totally random. It's based on radioactive decay. And when there's a Geiger counter that reads a count from this radioactive decay, it'll stop the spinning wheel at a random time, and it'll shoot a sponge at the person. So the person, of course, is going to get hit by the sponge. So randomness affects our lives. So it's not just a mechanical universe where everything is exactly like clockwork, but there's randomness. And then there's a later part where they get 3, these are 3, like, it's kind of like not a game show, but it's like a reality, you know, like it's kind of like a Survivor style show where you just have these 3 people and they're going through these challenges, but they're really puzzles. So they go through these 4 or 5 puzzles in the episode. Each of the 6 episodes has different a different 3 people. So it's kind of like Apollo, the Apollo program to the moon. You know, you have 6 episodes, 3 people, 18 people altogether. And so these 3 people, they go through these various things to find out that, hey, you know, when we make choices, we have these different universes. So I was thinking about this, and throughout the day, so just think about throughout your day today, if it's almost done, if it's just starting, if we're midway through, you've made a lot of choices, right? Could be a few choices, could be a lot of choices. So here we're going to go into maybe fiction, but sometimes fiction and fact are very close, really related. So I wouldn't even call this necessarily a hypothesis. It's just a thought. So imagine every time you make a decision that's a difficult decision, something that would leave you with a little bit of decision fatigue because you had to actually think about it, and you had to think, am I going to say this or that, or am I going to do this or that? And you had to decide. Okay, you had to build up the decision over a bit of time. And then you got to the decision point. So 2 things. Number 1, the time at which you get to the decision could be different based on random events, like if something random happened. Number 2, I mean, if it was kind of a flip a coin thing, you know, maybe something random happened in the hall and you're like, I'm just going to go with A, or I'm just going to go with B. Anyway, so each of those is your universe, the universe splitting into a different many worlds. Because the idea is that every possible world that could exist, possibly exist, will exist. And that's what the many worlds interpretation says. Now, from my perspective, it's not that they will exist, it's they're already in the future and in the past, and they're already parallel, and this is just a parallel path. But in any event, you probably look at it either way, and it's probably both at the same time, how some things are both at the same time and neither at the same time. That's the way physics gets at a certain point. But if you think about it, suppose you make certain choices in the day and then different choices in the day. You could have made either choice. Now just think of these branching out. So by the end of the day, suppose you've made, 20 choices. So you split 2, I'm just going to do 10 choices. Okay, so you've got 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024. So by the end of the day, let's say there's about 1,000 of you in you've made different choices. Okay, maybe there was 10 major choices in the day that were like relevant. And so there's like 1,000 of you, but think about it. Where do you all end up at the end of the day? Oh, and so, hey, decision fatigue is like, hey, I'm splitting away and my selves are splitting away from themselves. Now I think of this splitting as splitting kind of up away from the equilibrium, the bottom point. So imagining like water rolling down a hill, and you are water going down a hill, or you are a leaf on a stream going down a hill. But that leaf can go, left or right or left or right. So your choices, let's suppose all the choices that you made ended up being in the wrong direction. This did not make you happy, all these 10 choices in a row. I mean, this was the worst possible direction. You're going to want to come back to center. And if they all went the other way in the good direction, well, the good direction is going to be the middle, right? So you're going to have bad directions on the left and bad directions on the right, or how many ever dimensions you want to put in there. But then you go and you lay down on your bed and you go to sleep, and all 1,024 of you do that, right? I mean, in how many futures do you imagine that you're going to end up sleeping in a different place that night? Or even if you do, that you won't be back to your original bed a day or 2 or 3 or 5 or a month later. So let's just imagine all of you that get back in bed. So you get back in bed, say you go to bed at 10 o'clock, one of you goes to bed at 11 o'clock, a few of you go to bed at 11:30, most of you are in bed by midnight, 2 a.m.-ish, you're all doing deep sleep or REM sleep, and the sleep time is where you're actually coming in tune with all your other split universes, and the universes come back together. So that way it doesn't branch infinitely. They come back together at night while you're sleeping. And it's the sleeping that is the bringing the together of the different paths, the different pasts. And your memory is based on, remember, your memory, you can't be sure of your memory. Your memory is the most successful future past path. Maybe not the, it might not feel the most successful to you. Maybe it was the most common path. Okay, so at the moment you're watching this right now, you might be on like a really divergent path, but you might not remember it a week from now or something, how divergent it really was. If it was divergent from the rest of the path, if you did remember it, it's probably that it wasn't the divergent one. It was the one that most of your pasts went down. So by the time you wake up in the morning, and everybody wakes up, you're all recombined. It's like if most people haven't seen this film, but there's Tron Legacy, and in it the main character, Jeff Bridges' character, he recombines with his avatar, and that recombining, except in our case, in the morning, we're recombined with ourselves. And maybe we're not recombined with 100% of our other selves. You know, maybe one of us did, you know, get in a car accident or something and didn't make it. Or maybe one of them, you know, the car just broke down, they didn't make it home that night. But as the nights go on, I mean, I sleep in my bed almost every night. So this was just a night. The interesting thing is that some of these ideas might not, I mean, they might mathematically pan out. You know, I don't know. I would have to have some of the super mathematicians in cosmology work on that. But so there's a different idea. So the 150, trying to have like that 150 people that you actually talk with face to face, and you connect with, and you understand their story and they understand your story. And then this idea of the many worlds, but the many worlds coming back together at night for everybody. They expand during the day, during the night, they reintegrate. The reintegrating is learning and restfulness. And that's why we have to sleep. We have to reintegrate the selves. I mean, isn't that fun? A fun idea, even if it's science fiction. Isn't that kind of a fun idea? I like it. I think I could make quite a good story out of that. Wow, I've been going on for an hour already. An hour and like 20 minutes, hour and a half. You guys nobody's listening to this anymore, are you? Let me see, 78 minutes. Okay, I promised 3 more things. What did I say? Purpose. So we talked about purpose, I think. Feminism, collapse, we talked about that. All right, I'll give you the bacteria in the jar story. So this one, let me see if I can find it. Where is it at? The bacteria and the jar. The bacteria and the jar. Okay. So I'll show you this because this is kind of interesting. Okay, just a second. And then I'm just going to read it to you, but I'm going to share this just for a moment. I'm not going to let you read it for me, but you can go on visualcapitalist.com and there's a page that says visualizing the history of pandemics. And it shows, the current pandemic being really, really small. Like there it is right there, novel coronavirus, super small. If you click on it, it's probably going to be further up the list. See, where's that? See, it was over here. It's moved to here. It's going to pass that and pass that and pass. I mean, these are all one. See how they're all one? So it's going to get to here at least, and then it's going to go on to here. Anyway, let me share you this story. So one of my Facebook friends, she shared this, pointing out that, oh, this is not so bad. It's not bad at all. This is 4 days ago now, right? 4 days ago. Okay, so here's my story. I gotta get it back to the top. And the bacteria in the jar continued to double every minute. It had already been 55 minutes. Nothing looked to be a problem. After all, the jar was only 3% full. A minute later, it was 11:59. Wow, a few bacteria said. Looks like we're growing fast. But others said, nah, we're only 6% of this glass. That's not a problem. Still one more minute, 11:59, 11:57. And a few more bacteria were like, are you sure we aren't growing too fast? And a few were listening, and yet most said, look at this, only 12.5% filled, and we have a full 87.5% of empty space here. What are you worrying about? Well, another minute passed, 11:58, and still a few more were getting concerned. The jar was about 25% filled. But a poster came out which showed them the amount of space left in the jar just a few minutes ago. And on the poster, it showed only 3% filled. And so even though they knew they were at 25% now, the poster was comforting and was spreading virally. 11:59, the jar was half full. And just shy of a majority of the bacteria were taking precautions, washing hands, wearing masks when inside stores, maintaining physical distance as best they could from each other. But the other half said, hey, we have 50% empty space here. There's a lot of space, and we are all doing fine and have always done fine. And this is all a bunch of hogwash and a conspiracy. After all, look at the poster right here. Yeah, it's a bit out of date, but we aren't anything like those others now, are we? 12 o'clock, and the jar was full. And the ones that saw it coming were in the same boat as those who denied it was coming. And then they realized they were all in this together. Which goes back to Linda's point about us versus them, and how we need to all love each other and listen to each other. And at 11:01, after the jar burst open and the glass scattered on the floor of the lab, the millionaires looked down at the bacteria and sort of chuckled to themselves, since they'd bought up all the farmland, the food, the fossil fuels, and all the nicest places, while the bacteria had been arguing with each other about the speed of exponential growth and didn't realize they were headed for an economic collapse. But hey, that's just a story about bacteria. And humans are in control of their own destinies, right? So I wrote that yesterday, and then I had the talk with Linda today about the whole us them thing. So it's kind of a challenge to think of it us them, because that's really the patriarchal way to think of it, and the feminist way is, or the matriarchal way perhaps, is more love. Love each other, love everybody, like Jesus said, love everybody. It's doesn't mean anything that you're just showing love to your friends and family and neighbors, your own community members. It's the people that you don't know, showing love to them, that is the challenge. So, all right. So just a couple finishing items here. I'm going to go back and show you my slides again here. Doot, doot, doot. I like the sound effects, like Kramer, right? So this one is really good. This is the one that was shared with me, and you can see this in my watch history. This is not all my watch history, but this is the watch history that I have for when I'm on my computer at home, this computer, the desktop computer. I also have a phone and a tablet, and I don't have them synced up with one another. So when I watch videos on one or the other, they don't show up. So this was really good though. It's called Collapse, the Only Realistic Scenario. And if I just kind of skip forward and show you his scenarios. So basically he has these different scenarios for the future. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. So scenario 1, exponential growth, which is about the story I just read, right? Not possible. This one, exponential growth flattening out, but the ability to grow increasing, also not possible. Exponential growth, but then collapse and overshoot. See the overshoot and then collapse, but then up and down a little bit. Probably not going to happen. Definitely can't go like this. And so what we get into is overshoot and then undershoot. And then the question is, and he shows that a little bit later, can there be a less drastic undershoot? So this is a really good video. I would recommend it. I watched it as I watch almost everything is 2x speed. And then for people that are really interested about just investing in ideas, this one is with Chamath Palihapitiya, and that's kind of interesting too. So he's talking about, capitalism and how businesses have to be allowed to fail because that's what capitalism is, and otherwise it's not capitalism at all. So those were both really interesting. I enjoyed that. The future of education. Oh, right. So the future of education, let me close out of this. The future of education, and I should give myself a timer. I'm going to actually set a 3-minute timer for this, because this could be, a whole novel. The history of education. Well, education is learning. How do we learn? We learn from doing things. What sort of things? Well, what sort of things do deer learn? What sort of things do birds learn? They learn things. Obviously, they know some things, instinctual, just like I know some things. And Max Tegmark mentions this as well, that DNA can have a certain amount of information in it. So there can be instincts. There can be things that animals know how to do. Like mammals suckling, for example. I mean, is that something that they know how to do? There's instinctual things. And other animals, birds kind of know how to flap their wings and fly. They have to figure it out, but there's certain things, even ants and bees and things, like how about that language of the bees where they waddle around, they do this waddle dance, and they can tell the other bees where to go for flowers or whatever. So the future of education is learning from family members, learning from community, learning from individuals, learning from those who you're with, learning from others who are your neighbors, going outside, growing food, finding food, figuring out when does it grow, what's the weather like, what's the cloud, what are the clouds like, you know, how to read, how to write. By reading, by writing what? Well, by writing about real stuff in the universe. You know, before civilization and outside of civilization, there's not really schools. You just go with your age mates, and you have different ages all together, and the little ones teach the big ones things, and the big ones teach the little one things, and the parents and the moms are around, and the dads are around, and the uncles and everything, they're around as well, and the aunts and the grandparents are around, and everybody learns from everybody. Everybody learns what they need to survive. Everybody learns everything that the community needs to continue indefinitely. Everybody learns how to trade with other communities. Everybody learns what the rules are to be successful. Everybody learns everything there is to know, need to know. All the songs, all the stories, all of the everything. So I suspect Andrea is talking more like, well, how are we going to use technology in education? Well, there's lots of ways, but the most important thing to know is just, you know, how do you learn yourself? Because how you learn, how your kids learn, that's what learning is. All right, I'm going to end with a quote. So this quote was in Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos episode 8 or 9, whichever episode it was that we were watching. I like this one. So the idea is that photons, they can become entangled, or maybe they're always entangled with each other. They can split, and they'll change from, say their energy is 100, they'll change into 2 protons, which each have an energy of 50. 50 plus 50 is 100, but they'll split and they're entangled. And if something happens to this one, then the other thing will happen to the same one, or they will become separated. So I've got to learn more about quantum entanglement, but here's the quote anyways. And this comes from Anne, who is the writer, and she's the former wife of the late Carl Sagan. Dryden, I think her name is. And she kind of quoted and paraphrased Plato, because of course he was Greek. He was speaking ancient Greek at the time. A single being splits into 2 and separates. For the rest of their existence, each remains the one and only soulmate of the other, exquisitely attuned to the inner life of its partner, even if separated by a whole universe. Thank you for watching. If you made it to the very end, type in Plato in the comments, and then I'll know somebody actually watched the entire thing and made it to the end. I appreciate your time. I wish you the very best. We are going to get through this as long as we stick together and we reach out and we help each other and we're altruistic. And of course, we're practical and we're taking care of our food needs and keeping our pantry stored and growing food. And even if you don't know how to grow anything, just grow something. Grow some things outside in a window box, whatever. And reach out to your neighbors, help your neighbors, and whatever you can do, you know, offer. And try to build community online, in person. You got to do both, though. You got to do the in-person part, because your success is based on your neighbor's success. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one. My best wishes to you.